One of the beautiful things about consulting is that you're just drinking off a fire hose every day and you get exposed to so many different use cases. Anybody that's listening to this should give Salesforce Consulting a shot. It's just so interesting to be able to see companies and their processes and how they operate and how it gets connected to a platform. It's different features, different functionalities. It really challenges your creativity and your know-how. So consulting is just really this wonderful area of learning and being able to get, experience into things that work versus don't work.
Welcome to Salesforce Radio, your destination for insights, news, and community connections within the dynamic Salesforce ecosystem. Welcome to Salesforce Radio, Eric. Really nice to have you here.
I'm glad to be here on the back of having done a webinar last week where we're back again.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background for everybody. So Eric and I just did a Salesforce Ben webinar together on the RevOps build versus buy dilemma. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit today, but for sure, I'll put the link to the webinar and the recording in the comments here. Everyone should check it out. It was a really good discussion. And one of the great things that came out of it is I met Eric, and now he was nice enough to be a guest on the podcast. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Always fun to have these conversations. A lot of good conversation usually comes from it. So.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we've been doing on this podcast is really just getting a feel for how did you get to where you are today? And would love to just kind of start out with your story of how you came into the Salesforce ecosystem and then the RevOps ecosystem, or was it the other way around? And maybe you could just kick it off with that.
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about RevOps is that it just like Salesforce, it's like it finds you. I feel like, it's I was just talking last week, and it's like you come across people with all different kinds of backgrounds. I've worked with people in, backgrounds in political science. I just hired someone with a music background for the second time because I've hired someone with music backgrounds before. My story actually comes from the side of marketing. So when I finished college, I had just graduated with a degree in marketing and joined a company, and I was like, hey, they wanted an internship. I talked them into a part-time job with a 90-day review and to go full-time because that's, I had bills to pay at this point. And one of the many hats that I wore there was being the Salesforce admin. And lo and behold, 90 days came and went, and they were dragging their feet on giving me an offer. I found another job at another software company and, doing marketing as well there. I kind of ran trade shows. I was on the road a lot. But one of the many hats I wore there was also Salesforce admin. And had an opportunity after 2 years at that company, had an opportunity to kind of start my own thing and went into independent consulting, decided to really pursue the Salesforce side of things and go into independent consulting and grew and scaled that over the years. That was 2013. So over 2013, 14, 15, 2015, I started hiring people. The consulting firm got up to 9 employees. Had to take some time off in 2019, went back to independent consulting, and then all the planets aligned, and I decided to jump client side in 2021. Memory serves me right. Became senior director of CRM at a global HR tech company. Got to see everything from the other side, which is a very interesting experience. And I reported under revenue operations. And I think ultimately the passion that I got from Salesforce was that the ability to build things and help things become more efficient. So Salesforce is just a fantastic tool for it, as we all know by now. But the passion was the efficiency and helping streamline things. And as RevOps started gaining a lot of traction at my last company, I reported on the RevOps. I definitely knew it was something that I want to continue to grow into, and help influence roadmaps and help really, be that tip of that spear that we're talking about in the webinar the other day, that helps bring that tech stack together with the strategy and the processes and everything. And I managed to find that here at Lendz. So, the VP of RevOps here at Lendz today. And, we got a chance to do some digital transformation with the implementation of Salesforce from scratch. We're migrating off legacy systems. We're kind of tying everything together and kind of blank slate after 13 years, 14 years of all of this stuff, being able to kind of start blank slate and be able to put all those learning lessons and all those mistakes that we want to avoid into practice. So it's been an exciting journey. Really, nothing but thankfulness for all the things I got to live and experience. And and we're still writing that chapter out. So it's been good.
Yeah, it sounds like, at least from the short version, an exciting journey. Definitely some variables there. Some things have happened, some different things. When you were in that first job that you went into, so basically you went into it because it was a marketing company, right? That's what you're saying?
So it was first job was a software company, but I graduated in marketing. So I was looking for marketing opportunities. I would soon, unbeknownst to me, I'd be soon bit by the bug of the accidental admin and then just kind of start diving into it further.
So when you went to the second company after that 90 days where they didn't give you an answer, you were looking at that point for Salesforce, or was that also kind of a coincidence that there was that common denominator in that company number two?
I think it was just a common denominator. That second company was really where it kind of sparked off because after my first couple of months there, we hired a global director of sales. When I first joined, there was a marketing manager, and she ended up working at Salesforce coincidentally, and now she's at a different company as a CMO. But the global director of sales, once she left, he came in, I reported to him, and he was a Silicon Valley type guy. He worked at companies like SuccessFactors, Zora, and really, a really sharp guy. And he would come to me because one of my many things was owning Salesforce. And he would come to me and he's like, look, at SuccessFactors, Salesforce was able to do this for us. Like our Salesforce was set up this way. And he would find these screenshots of these dashboards and random things. And I just found the passion of reverse engineering those screenshots and be like, how can we do this? How can we make this happen? And I started realizing this passion that I had. And I was just equating Salesforce to be the grown-up version of Legos, even though I still play with Legos as a grown-up. But it's the ability to build things and help things become more efficient, right? Helping folks streamline, know where to focus their attention by just better leveraging technology. It was just something that I became incredibly passionate about.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And how many users were there in that first org that you were kind of managing there?
First org, we were a really small company. I think we were 3 users, and second, the company, this one that had the global director of sales, I think we had about 25 users. So we're still a fairly small organization. We had a lot of folks in India. We had an office in India, but none of them were in Salesforce at the time that I was there.
And was everyone kind of one role, or did you have different roles? Did you have management and support and sales? Who were the people that you were working for on the Salesforce side?
Yeah, at that time, all of our users were sales. So we had some marketing, but marketing team was 2 people. So you struggled to put a case together there. I know they've grown considerably since, and they got some VC investment and all of these things. I'm sure that their Salesforce environment is far more utilized, but funny enough, I spoke to someone I think it was a year ago, and they were like, we still use that opportunity score formula that you put together. And I'm like,
that's the best.
Exactly. I was like, something survived.
Meanwhile, you would have done it differently today, I'm sure, if you
Oh, absolutely. I've built crap 6 months ago that I already call tech that. It's just one of those things that you learn more as you get more invested. It's a continuous journey, but 2, it's Salesforce is just rolling out so much functionality that half the times you build something is because at the time you didn't have access to it. I mean, you tell me anybody that implemented Salesforce before 2017, and I can immediately point out an org that probably has a ton of old Apex just sitting there because flows weren't as flexible as they are today.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And it's one of the things that, when we were doing the webinar, I kind of wanted to build on it a little bit more. I didn't get a chance, but, we were kind of talking about the build versus buy model. And what year did flows get introduced into the ecosystem?
Ooh, so now we're in trivia land.
I don't know the answers.
I don't remember when visual flows came in. I want to say I think it was around 2012 or 13 because I didn't dabble with visual flows. Lightning flows I think was around 2017, and that was the whole new canvas that we're used to seeing today, right, and everything. And that's kind of where things took off because it was really tough. And people listening that have more experience than I do with visual flows can probably correct me fairly quickly, but you couldn't call a visual flow as easily as you can call a flow today. I think you could probably leverage process builders, but that came around, I want to say 2015. So again, you were really limited with what you could do. Flows as we know today, about 2017, I want to say.
Yeah. And I feel like even, I've only been really in the ecosystem since 2020, but even then there was still some kind of resistance towards everything going to flows. I remember kind of when the announcement came out, hey, process builders getting deprecated, etc. Everyone thinks everything's going to move over to flows. People were, a bit upset, and they still didn't have full belief in it. And now it's only a couple of years later, everyone's saying, flows this, flows that. People, I get on calls, people. I recently talked to guys that, listen, I'm probably one of the best people you're ever going to meet that knows how to deal with flows, like I'm one of the top flow guys, and that's how people feel now. Like people feel like they've already started to really master it. And it's cool to see that development happen really quickly where, people went from being not so many years ago, a bit wary about the tool to now, hey, this is our automation. This is how we do things in Salesforce. It's not something we're afraid of. And I found that to be a really cool progression.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that I've seen, especially with Flow, and it's been my favorite saying for the longest time. It's the great Uncle Ben quote from Spider-Man: "With great power comes great responsibility." And that's what Flow is, right? It's great power for someone who's not a programmatic developer, who doesn't write code. There's just so much power to harness in there. And especially if you start talking the unofficial SF components and like all of these other things that could just like really exponentially skyrocket the functionality before you have to write a single line of code. And the key challenges that Salesforce has in their hands is, how do we make this simple enough where it's kind of like super point and click, like building an original workflow was, or building a process builder was? Because the user interface for someone who's never built automation in Salesforce in workflows, there's very little that you can get wrong. There's very little that, process builder, you could get more wrong in process builders, and I have my own bone to pick with process builders, but leave that for a separate podcast. But flows is just, it's hard to contain and make it as simple, right? A lot of people are usually intimidated by flows because, yes, it's a blank canvas. It looks very simple at the beginning, but once you start getting into variables and all the different elements and all these things, like how do you keep it simple, right? And especially after deprecating, right? Workflows and process builders. So if someone's starting out in the Salesforce ecosystem today, they can't do anything with these old tools, and they have to kind of learn, right? This, I can't think of a better word than monster, but it's just so much functionality that, Salesforce has this challenge on their hands to make it, attainable to everyone, right? And make it as easy as possible, even for the most basic of use cases.
Before, you kind of touched on this idea of, hey, any org before a certain time, I know there's some Apex sitting in there, somewhere, and it's doing something, or maybe it's not doing anything at this point, or it's going to do something one day and no one's going to know what happened, right? That's kind of one of the scary things about it. Were you teaching yourself at some point, hey, I need to learn Apex. I need to be able to call Apex in my Salesforce automation? Or is that something you stayed away from and then you got kind of lucky when Salesforce started coming out with all these new automation tools?
I've dabbled with Apex a little bit, enough to learn that I have no passion for it. And I'm not here to knock on Apex. I absolutely love Apex. I think it's a fantastic thing. I think I've, throughout my consulting years, I've learned just enough to know when is a better time to go to Apex versus flows. And there is a time, right? There absolutely is a time. I know that I'm the guy that runs Flow Fest, and, like a lot of people are like, flow this and flow that, but there are times, very common times, that Apex may be a better solution. So I think ultimately where I've tried to grow my skill set, and that's why I did the platform developer one. I had zero intentions of becoming a developer, but I just want to understand enough about code to know when to leverage it. And then I can call a developer or someone like, back then I was in consulting. I'd find an independent developer that did consulting on the side. I'd be like, look, here are the requirements. Here's what we need to make happen right now. Wave the magic wand, whatever it is that you do when we're not watching, and come at me with some fancy LWC or whatever we need to make this work.
Yeah, it's interesting because also it's like, some people are still so comfortable with that. And some people aren't developers, are comfortable even with the idea of using Apex or having someone else come in and put in some, a line of Apex into their flow, something like that. But then some people, it's become something that's very foreign to them. They don't exactly know how they should relate to development in Salesforce because Salesforce is giving all these tools, yet Salesforce developers, as we know, are in high demand. And, there's still plenty of things for them to be doing within their org, but you've got, admins who are maybe a little bit at this point afraid of introducing development into the org, whereas not so many years ago, it was a necessity to do so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, 5-6 years ago, you almost immediately hit a brick wall, the second you want to do any sort of configurations, right? So today you have, again, going back to all of the developments of Flow, and that was part of what Salesforce did. Like this was intentional by design with Salesforce because the demand for developers was so high in the mid 2010s that there just wasn't enough people to do the work that the customers needed. And Salesforce saw that like there's only so much that we as a platform can scale because we're starting to get limited by, you know, the pace that customers can customize these things for. So they made this massive investment into developing, you know, this declarative tool, which, you know, we all know as Flow, to be able to give more possibilities for folks who aren't developers. And that was a big landscape change. Right. Which is, and again, don't fool yourself. Like for all the things that Flow can do, code can do that much more. Right. It's not like we're closing the gap and eliminating the need for developers.
Sure.
But there definitely is now a whole extra step before you make the jump to developers. I've heard a couple of folks trying to go straight to code before they even learn flows. And you know, it's an odd career decision, you know, because I feel like you should learn the natural progression of the tools available to you. But it's, you know, it's such a large ecosystem. You find so many interesting, you know, use cases and career paths that we're just taking it in and learning as we go.
Yeah, and I think you know the accidental admin story is much more popular, and you hear about it a lot more than the accidental developer, right? it's a bit of a different trajectory. Whereas someone like you know, were you interested in technology? I mean, you mentioned you're interested in Legos. You know, we'll say that's more the engineering side, the problem solving side. Were you interested in, you know, in tech, in computer software before you got out of school and went to that first job?
I had no idea that I was going to end up in tech. Like I just, you know, like I grew up playing computer games. Like in my house, like my father was a big computer guy. Like he was in aviation, but he just had this passion for it. And on my end, I just kind of, you know, like, I mean, I didn't associate it with at the time. Like it was literally like it completely caught me by here, you figure this out. And as you start dabbling with it and seeing the possibilities, you know, it's just like it starts sucking you in. It's like this little black hole that Salesforce manages to get all of us in. And, you know, next thing you know, you're just like learning more and more and trying to feed your appetite for all of these things. I mean, I was trying to I was intentionally breaking dev orgs to try to replicate issues of people on LinkedIn just to see if I could solve them. It was just kind of like that. You could geek out on the, well, back then we didn't have Trailhead and all of these, you know, all of you younglings and all the things that you young kids have nowadays. But it's kind of like this interesting effect that this tool has that, you know, like it challenges your creativity to try to find solutions for things, right? So that's just something that like I never saw it coming.
Tell me a little bit about when you were a consultant. What kind of work were you doing? What kind of organizations were you working with? And how did that inform the way that you operate now, going back into a company and, you know, running the Salesforce org?
So I'll start by saying that anybody that's listening to this should give Salesforce consulting a shot. I'll put the caveats to it because it's not for everyone. But one of the beautiful things about consulting is that you're just drinking off a fire hose every day and you get exposed to so many different use cases. So, you know, as someone who's passionate about RevOps, it's just so interesting to be able to see companies and their processes and how they operate and how it gets connected to a platform, right? It's different features, different functionalities. It really challenges your creativity and your know-how to be able, and you get exposed to all of these things, right? And sometimes you come in and Salesforce is already implemented and you're like, wow, I didn't like, this is such a great thought of how to use this functionality or what have you, or here's how they got around a common challenge that you may have with some standard object, right? And so consulting is just really this wonderful area of learning and being able to get, you know, experience into things that work versus don't work. You know, the downside to that for everyone listening and already applying to all the consultants is that again, you are drinking from a fire hose. It can be stressful, which in some ways, again, not for everyone, but it can teach you a lot about, you know, overcommitting and not taking in more than what you can, and also working with stakeholders and setting reasonable expectations, right? They're coming to you as the expert. They'll have all of the asks and the wants in the world, and they see the Salesforce commercials and they think, oh, it's just as easy as, like in Mahle McConaughey figured this out in 30 seconds. Why are we not live with this yet? And I'm like sitting here and I'm like, they're looking to you to set those expectations, say, okay, here's what we reasonably need to, to consider and go for it. And it's not as easy, right? Because, Mr. President comes down to his room and says, I want this right now. Okay, is the default answer that I've wanted to give for the longest time. But part of the consulting is also learning how to work with stakeholders and setting reasonable expectations, working within the lines of what you have, which typically is the budget of the project. And yeah, I absolutely love consulting. I think it's such a great exposure to so many different aspects that help you grow as a professional, not only in the technical side of Salesforce, but beyond as well.
Yeah, you touched on something that I really relate to, which is that, when Mr. President comes down the hallway and says, hey, this is the top priority, and you go off and you start doing your research and stuff like that, it's sometimes hard to stomach the fact that Mr. President might have a completely different top priority in 2 days from now, and that you went through all this research, you started doing all this stuff, and he moves on, right? And sometimes when someone's getting that, at least in my experience from what I've seen, when someone's getting that directive from on top, they end up just running with that directive and going to look, to solve the issue without even understanding how the issue got brought to Mr. President's attention in the first place. And then someone a lot of times forces that person to bring it down the chain, but then the top forgets about it and you kind of lose, the middle person in there who really needed it. So I guess what my question is in this, what are you doing today with your users? Who are the users that you're mostly interfacing with, and what kind of stuff are they doing in Salesforce?
Yeah, at Lendz, I absolutely love here at Lendz, because one of the things that we're getting really to work with all the departments, and we are really a small organization with a really good culture of what we're doing, and everyone's trying to help each other out. So we're really working with the different we're working with the sales folks, we're working with the marketing team, we're working with the operations team, and really trying to understand the processes that they're doing. We got a lot of things that are going on, but at the same time, it's kind of helping understand and bring, piece by piece down and say, okay, here's what we need to prioritize. It's very rare, at least in my experience, to be able to do these things, but we've been able to knock down the urgency of something, or stretch out a project to say, okay, we really want to do this right, and we want to take some more time to be able to figure this out properly. Switching our current system where the operations is currently using and migrating them out of that is really one of the key things that I'm that we're just really working hard to redo this entire process, because we basically built it all in some really flat object, and we're trying to switch that around. And now it's we're okay, if we're going to bring this to Salesforce, now some of this stuff needs to become contact roles. Some of this stuff needs to become all of these other things. And we're okay, we're not as close as we thought. We need to kind of reset those expectations. But Lendz is definitely not immune to coming in, coming in on a Monday and be I just learned about this thing, and now we have to jump all of it on this project. And I'm oh, great. What are we going to reprioritize, right? So I think part of as one of the key things as a stakeholder, and again, we learned this really well in consulting, is really being able to compartmentalize time and say, okay, we're going to need to be able to dedicate 20% of the time that we have to this. And come hell or high water, this 20% is untouchable. Some other things may be able to move around, right? But we're going to keep working forward with this to be able to improve on, the process while still delivering, right, these long-term projects and not getting it derailed.
And did you say that at Lendz, when you came in, that you were basically in charge of the initial implementation of Salesforce?
Yeah, so that was part of what I was brought in for. So one of the key things that I was doing was basically sales were basically on Outlook and Excel spreadsheets. And we wanted to kind of be able to bring that in and build the foundation. We just hired a CRM manager. He starts the following week, so he can take the foundation forward while I'm starting to look into more of the company as a whole with all of its technology platforms. But yeah, that was part of day one. We already had a transformation budget that we put together last year. My coming to Lendz was a very carefully calculated thing. We got a chance. I was talking to the president for several months. We actually put a budget together. He was looking to do a round of investments, and he's like, I want to put this transformation in there. So help me understand how much it's going to cost, staffing wise, technology platforms, and everything. Very, very large departure, because it's very rare that you get to be this involved early on, right? Before you're even hired. And you actually get to, say, hey, here's the budget that it's going to take. Here's what we need to make it happen, and be able to execute on it. So I feel like I'm very out of the norm right now, but it's a very, very interesting position to be in, because I'm very thankful that we're able to kind of put that all out in the open before joining. So
yeah, it sounds like it. And so how long ago was that at this point? When did you join Lendz?
So I joined in January. That's only 4 months ago. So
oh wow.
Yeah. In that time, we managed to get Salesforce up and running. We managed to get a couple of things, basically set up. So we got a couple of things going on with AI already, which is kind of exciting. Being able to kind of come up with customized greetings. We already are halfway through migration to get the operations team in there. So a lot of exciting things. Like, we're really running fast, which for at times is tough, especially coming from large organizations and a lot of bureaucracy. It may take much longer to execute on things like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment just to get, to go live in a couple of months. What are some of the main things that you would recommend to organizations that are in a position where maybe they went live with Salesforce, maybe they're planning on going live and they've had some, big delays? Because obviously we know what that's like. And I speak to people all the time that are in these kind of never-ending Salesforce projects. What do you say to them about budgeting? What do you say to them about expectations? How can they manage that, either on their own or with a partner?
I think the biggest thing, first of all, that I've learned is that you can't take things personally. There's a lot that we can fix, right? Salesforce has all these capabilities. If we get a little more budget, if we get some extra help, there's all these extra things that we can do. I think the most that you have to be able to learn, especially in large organizations where there's people above you that are making these decisions, right? With regards to finances and budgets and all these things, is that you can only work with the tools that you're given. There is a lot to talk about, trying to learn to be influential and making a good business case, right? To be able to approach folks and try to get more sign off, which maybe we could dive into throughout this conversation. But at a fundamental is that, learn to be able to stand your ground and say, look, I tell everyone, I used to tell this all the time in my last company. It's like, you can either tell me all the requirements that you want delivered, or you can tell me the time that I have to deliver on the things, right? But if you're going to give me all these requirements and you need all of these requirements, I reserve the right to tell you when we can deliver this by with the resources that we have. And equally, if you're going to put a time on me, then I reserve the right to be able to tell you what I can deliver within that time, right? So because if budget, it remains a constant and this is all I have to work with, then I have to be able to tell you what I can work with, and not what I was doing to myself by setting that barrier. Is that I'm not overcommitting, I'm not setting unrealistic expectations, I'm not putting myself in a position where me and my team are going to have to be working every single night for the rest of our lives because Mr. President or Mrs. President are said, oh yeah, I need this by tomorrow, right? And I say, look, I don't know what you're doing. Like, this is, if you want this by tomorrow, we should have started investing in something like weeks ago. But with what we have, this is what we can do.
Yeah, I absolutely hear that. And, it's really a challenge. I think also a lot of people, there's so many horror stories about how people kind of have gone into these situations of the never ending implementation and people lose sight. And then what happens is a lot of times they compromise, right? And then it's just a never ending project to keep going for, as long as you can imagine. So you mentioned AI in there. I'd love to hear a little bit about where you're thinking to take AI in your org.
Yeah. So one of the key things that we're doing is that everyone's learning, right? And we're experimenting. So one of the interesting ways that we're experimenting is to try to put an ultra personalized sign off message at the end of each newsletter. So the core of a newsletter is basically, whatever is going on for that week in the newsletter. But what we've started doing using flows and OpenAI, which hopefully we'll be able to show how to do this with Prompt Builder and automate this episode for Salesforce soon. But ultimately, what we're doing is that we're having flow to capture basic information about a contact. If they're signed up, if they're a customer, if they're a prospect, and if they're a customer, how much volume they've done with us. And we kind of build this prompt, and we're doing it almost user story-like for those that are familiar with Agile. So it's kind of saying, as a customer of this company, you have done this much, this, and this. Write a summary for the email, for an email newsletter, kind of like referencing good things. And, like if, and effectively we come up with this ultra personalized end of a newsletter message. So it's kind of interesting because the president and I were having this conversation at first, and we're like, should we put it at the top? Because that way people see it. We ultimately agreed to do it more as a conclusion so the newsletter doesn't get affected. And we're like, yeah, probably no one's going to read it. But if they do, like, they're going to be blown away by this, right? So it was a really interesting first use case for us. And one of the key things that we're starting to look into doing as well, and this is very much kind of like skunkworks side project type of things, is that we're trying to create kind of like a virtual character. And a lot of folks have done it, and they usually do it externally. Like if you want a great example, there's of Virgin Voyages, the cruise line, and Vivi, that they've created this ChatGPT character or whatever that you could interact with. And it's all powered by Live Agent, by Service Cloud, which a really cool thing, but we're trying to do it internally. So basically, like if we have a digital assistant that can help guide folks and give a daily kind of greeting for our own team to say, hey, here's some things that you might want to focus on, right? Here are some candidates that might be the perfect folks to reach out to today. Consider adding them to your, sales engagement cadences or whatever the case may be, or even kind of gamify it and saying, hey, this past week you were only top 3, like you only made it as the 3rd with getting your connects on, so-and-so is doing better. Like, what are we going to do this week? And really just try to use like enough of these more personified experiences that Gen AI can give us to really help kind of like just build this culture within the organization. So for now, that's what we're doing. We're also working on some larger projects that are kind of exciting that I'm not fully at liberty to discuss, but that also involves more technology than just basic Gen AI. It's, like document recognition and things like that to help speed up our processes.
Yeah, that's really cool. And just, wondering, like, what are you doing to equip yourself, or what are you doing internally to make sure that you have the resources to be able to build things like that? Like, is this something you're just learning kind of from scratch, how to use the prompt builder and stuff like that? Or how do you learn how to do that right now?
It's a lot of trial and error, right? It's just kind of, there's some basic materials out there, but like the one thing that I've learned, if we could still call ourselves in the early adopters phase, is that people don't understand what they're going to use AI for. Like there's a lot of conversation about AI this and AI that, and AI is going to automate so many things. And, we're trying to see what works and what doesn't work, right? Like I can tell you right now that newsletter greeting took far more time in development than we wanted to. Not in making the technology work, but more in just fine tuning it to something that we could actually be comfortable with saying, yeah, we're okay in using this. And we even had to use the more expensive GPT-4, which is far more expensive than GPT 3.5. For those that haven't played with it yet. So to really be able to get to a quality that we're like, all right, we could put this on an email, right? And we ran and fine-tuned the prompts like for weeks at a time before we were okay with saying, all right, this can be in an email address. So it's really just kind of like trial and error, just dedicating time for trial and error, revising where possible, right? And really trying to like see, okay, here's where we can genuinely use this for. I think the way that AI should be looked at is that, and I know this sounds cliche because I think a lot of people said it, but like I'm literally feeling it in my skin now that I've done this enough, is that AI is a good tool to augment what you do. It's not supposed to plain automate. Like if you're trying to use AI to plain automate, you're probably going to have a very limited success rate because it's just not there without proper training. You talk about garbage in, garbage out methodologies, all of these data, like your data's crap, it's going to take a ton more effort to try to get AI to do anything believable or useful that you'd be willing to sign off, especially externally, or even if it's predictive AI, like predictive AI has been for a long time. And, I've been running models for a really, really long time, worked on some personal projects to try to, use past Formula One data to figure out what the qualifying results are going to be using predictive AI. And again, the quality of the data comes back again and again to kind of haunt you if you don't have your ducks in a row. So
right. So I think you're in a big advantage right now with your current org because it's a clean slate, or at least it was, a couple months ago. So
I mean, I'm gonna make everyone I'm gonna piss off the entire audience listening to right now. I'm in clean slate with 13 years of experience in an organization where every individual in every organization has an external unique identifier. And like, we were fortunate enough that we were granted access to the entire database of all the companies and all of the individuals in the real estate, because we're doing some tools to help also with fraud prevention. And it's it's very hard. Although we're still finding ways to make to screw up the data here. So
always,
yeah.
There's humans involved.
There's humans involved. There's
real people behind the computer.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm looking at it from the perspective of having to deal with old junk data. Like, I mean, companies that have done M&As, like mergers and acquisitions, oh, we're just going to take these customers that have these random sets of unique identifiers, and half of them never got a unique identifier to begin with, or like a customer number or anything like that. We're just going to kind of slam it against this old methodology of like the customers here. And then we'll just keep acquiring companies and just kind of jumbling it together until one way we can't recognize, down from up, and we can't tell which, companies we acquired that had the same customer. So we're just going to live with the duplicates and we'll be okay. And to try to go from that to everything has a unique identifier and you have a blank slate. I mean, I'm really, really concerned that if this doesn't work out well, like I'm really out of excuses to say, oh yeah, it was something else. Like, but so far it's been really exciting, and it's been like, I mean, everything that I complained about for years and just being a Salesforce, like the kind of stuff that you just in general have to deal with in Salesforce. I'm like, there's almost no downside right now. So
the newsletter at this point is live. You're using the Gen AI in there?
So we've used it a handful of times. We're still talking, because I think for us right now is how do we want the message to come across? So like, I think we're still trying to organize ourselves, whether we want to try to do it where this is something that the account executives can sign off on, right? And say, hey, here's the message for the messages that are going for this week, and just show them on a report that they can kind of spot out anything that they want to fine tune before it goes out, or whether this is going to be a marketing thing. So I think we've gotten to a point that it's reliable enough and it's giving us good information. Especially like when we work with partners, like it's calling out which individuals within the partner is doing most. So if some of their partners are doing, like if you're sending this to, Mr. ABC, but Mrs. DEF have been crushing Mr. ABC, like we'll call that out, say, hey, Mrs. DEF is really kind of, like ramping up, reach out to us today. We'll help you get there. Let's try to see if we can beat her this week. And like messages like that, which is like to be able to kind of like really personalize it to that extent. We're trying to see how we can add more relevance to it as well, because I think ultimately relevance will crush personalization. But to be able to do something like that, it's still fairly unheard of, right? But it did take us, I think, 12 weeks worth of newsletters and reviewing the messages that would go out and everything before we really were kind of comfortable with rolling it out. And hopefully within a month or two, mostly because of other priorities kind of taking place, like we'll be able to get that singing like on a consistent weekly basis.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. And it's really cool to, it's already not even my first conversation of talking to people who are involved in this within Salesforce, like actually, building things, using it, trying it out. And, we all know that Salesforce made a big push, at least from the marketing side, to talk about AI. And it's really been cool for me to see the way that the professionals within the orgs who are building these things out are like, okay, well, Salesforce, you guys kind of, broke the ice by just mentioning it, but now like we're going to go figure out how to make it work and we're going to make it happen. And I'm sure that Salesforce is listening to, not necessarily this conversation, but listening to what their users are doing in one way or another to see how they're implementing this to get the next big ideas for, for where they can take things within the products overall. Do you have a relationship with Salesforce? Have you been like involved with Salesforce over the years from a corporate perspective?
What was the old Facebook status? It's complicated. No, I have a pretty good relationship with a couple of folks just throughout the years. Having organized FlowFest, I got to meet a lot of the PMs for Flows. I've gotten to come across a couple of different individuals, especially like I've on the Salesforce admin podcast and a couple of other like on blog writing. So you get to meet a lot of folks. It's been really interesting because I think that ultimately Salesforce kind of follows the Microsoft methodology in some ways, where it's kind of like when Windows 95 came out, and I know I'm horribly aging myself here. like it was just filled with bugs, right? And then it was like throughout time, they just released updates to kind of like stable it out. And then, they kind of conquered the market for many reasons. One of them being kind of like, hey, instead of perfection being our enemy, we're just going to get something that's good, right,
Sure.
out there, and then we'll make it better. And I think Salesforce kind of followed that to a pretty decent extent. I think you can see it's evident with the idea exchange, kind of saying, hey, we put functionalities in here. What do we prioritize next? And just emphatically listening to folks, be critics. I think what's the session in Dreamforce that I think is one of the best sessions in terms of attendance and engagement, like true to the core, right? Where they'll just just be there, just throw it at us. What are we doing wrong, right? And they'll generally take that stuff to their hearts and kind of say, all right, now let's see what we got to do to to kind of be able to improve on this. And those I think those true to the core sessions are known for being kind of passionate. Let's
To say the least.
let's say the least. So yeah, I think ultimately, like kind of like building these relationships with these folks and seeing how everything's coming along. I got a chance to be on the pilot program for a couple of flow things, functionalities that like 6-9 months ago that are coming out like in the upcoming release. So there's a lot of great things that they're doing, right, in terms of keeping up to speed.
It's a lot of fun. So I guess before we wrap up, any last words of advice for people who are listening, or where to learn more about what you're doing from?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on LinkedIn. I usually have all of my stuff and my thoughts and my every time that I have a random thought, I'll try to put it on LinkedIn if I think if it helps other folks. Ultimately, my big example is that don't lose sight of just beyond the technology. I think we were talking about on the webinar, and Ben McCarthy was kidding around that I somehow still managed to bring Formula One into a webinar. And I'll bring it back again for this podcast that, it doesn't matter. Like you can give us, like $500 million to build the best Formula One car in the world. And this is the car that will go, fastest around the corners. But if you're using that car for dirt roads, then that car is not going to go very far because it needs smooth pavement. It needs banked corners, right? It needs smooth air, so the system will only do so much if it's not properly aligned to processes and all of these things. And I think for a Salesforce professional to really be able to excel in what they do is being able to put themselves in other stakeholders' shoes in the company's processes. So being able to always keep in mind, right, like how does this fit big picture wise, and is this the like when you're considering what functionality in Salesforce to use, right? That's probably one of the key things that will really define an awesome professional. Be it some people may call it BA skills or whatever it's called, but it's one of those crucial things to really be able to. And I know I'm the RevOps guy talking, and that's purely RevOps talk speaking, but it's fairly crucial. Trust me.
Well, Erick, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate it. Appreciate this relationship, and excited to hear kind of where you take things over the next 9 months in this new org. And maybe we'll have a follow-up session in the future where you tell me where you went wrong.
Yeah. Confessions. Whenever we release the confessions version of this podcast, I'll be here. I'll be the first in line.
I love it. Thanks so much. It's been wonderful.
Right. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Salesforce Radio. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting discussions, expert tips, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders. Stay connected with Titan, plus the power of the planet's leading CRM. See you next time.